One of the purposes of the textbooks everywhere is to construct a national identity. Now, this is an official narrative which is based on, in our case especially, but otherwise elsewhere too, on exclusion, erasure, marginalization. For instance, the exclusion is that anything common between Pakistan and North India, including the language, is erased. I mean, it's simply excluded. Prehistory, that is to say, before the 8th century, before Muhammad bin Qasim arrived, is excluded. So, many people have written on this. K.K. Aziz has written about the murder of history of Pakistan. Dr. Pervez Hoodbhai and Dr. Nair wrote a book for us a long time back about these things. What is wrong with our textbooks, etc. Rubina Sehgal has written about it. Subtle Subversion is a very 2004 product, I believe. It's a report which is on this. So it's not a new issue. Many people know about it. Why doesn't it go away? In my view, it doesn't go away because the way the state has been constructed is by exclusion, is by othering. The India is the other. And therefore, all construction of the state has to be focused upon this India-centeredness, one. And the other reason is that Islam being this Islamic nationalism, our nationalism being focused on the use of Islam as a primary symbol, with Urdu as a secondary symbol, it was necessary, therefore, for the state, the logic of the state was such that they emphasized upon it to the exclusion of all other multiple narratives in this multilingual country. That is why the sidelining began early. It actually began in the 1950s. But it became stronger. Gandhi was there. He was removed because of, as power decreased and the perception of weakness increased, emphasis upon a very, on the military, upon glorification of the armed forces, wars, those kind of things increased. Especially after the 1965 war, and then after the 1971 war it increased very much. So Ziaul Haq did not introduce it, but he of course accelerated it, the trend. Now, I looked at textbooks. I'll just give you a small example of textbooks in my book, again published by the Oxford University Press, called Language, Ideology and Power. Since that's a huge tome, I am not going to force you to read it. Nobody reads it anyway. But that book looked at class 1 to class 10 textbooks. I was not doing the same thing which other people were doing. I was looking specifically at language textbooks. And one of the things which emerged from this, all languages, that is, optional languages, Arabic, Persian, Pashto, Sindhi, and so on and so forth, English of course, and Urdu. What emerged from this was that there was an ideology. This ideology was the ideology of the garrison state, a state in which the military had the primary position and in which public sentiment had to be focused in favor of the military, in which therefore wars, etc., had to be glorified. Their reasons were not to be given. They were to be taken for granted as necessary and therefore the duty of citizens, and in which the Hindu had to be vilified because that too was part of this construction, this narrative, in which all sacrifices had to be made necessary for the public in the name of national interest, in the name of security. So Urdu was the language in which was the ideology-carrying language. Not that the number of lessons of this kind, ideological lessons, were more in Urdu textbooks. They were not. They were most in Arabic textbooks and in Persian textbooks. And they were also there even in Pashto textbooks and Punjabi textbooks, so as to fight any urge for the sub-national group, ethnic group to sort of assert itself. But Urdu, I call it the ideology-carrying language because it is taught everywhere. It is compulsory. It's not an optional language. So if you have 40% lessons, and it was 40%, 40% of the lessons are ideology carrying. You are imprinting on the minds of young people much, much more than other kind of textbooks in Persian or so on, which are optional, and so people do not read them. Now, specific instances of this was that in the 1965 war, what was given in the textbook was that suddenly on the 6th of September, India came and attacked Pakistan. That's it. Children were not explained that there was in fact a history, and that one kind of strategy was to send people across the border and in the vain hope of wresting Kashmir out of India. This was not given. It's a policy which was followed later with disastrous consequences, led to Kargil and so on. And you know very well the covert war which went on. But this was never questioned because it was simply never brought to the view of ordinary people and students and others. Neither on the TV, nor in the films, nor on the radio, nor in the textbooks. That was not the only influence on people's mind, but it is a major influence. It is one influence among many, but it wasn't questioned anywhere. Although the number of narratives, personal stories, autobiographies, memoirs, talking about it, Air Marshal Asghar Khan, General Musa, my version, and so on. There are so many of them giving this narrative, saying exactly what happened, etc. None of them are known to our students. Now, there's something else about Urdu too, not just the number of lessons. It is Urdu itself, the language itself has been used as a symbol for Muslim nationalism. And therefore, lots of myths go into the making of this. The construction of the identity of Urdu itself is to be questioned. I have a book, and I don't know if I should be doing this, but I want to show it to you so that you can buy it, very brazenly, so that you can buy it. But then, you see, this book, published by the Oxford University Press, it's a social and political history of Urdu. The politics part of it is that Urdu, the myths about Urdu, such as Urdu is a martial language, is repeated again and again by the many agencies in Pakistan. I do not mean intelligence agencies, I mean all other kind of government agencies. Again and again there are papers, and again people write about it. Children are told about it. Children call it Askari Zaban, etc. The fact, however, is that Urdu has the beginnings of other normal languages. It is not created in a lashkar. It is not a Lashkari Zaban. The word Urdu in Turkish does mean lashkar, does mean camp, does mean military camp. But the word was there. However, the language was called Hindi for about 500 years. That is why the title of the book is From Hindi to Urdu. There's one thing called Sanskritized Hindi. Of course, that was created in the 19th century. But there is another common language, the mother of Urdu and modern Hindi, that was called Hindi for over 500 years. Every Persian document, every Devanagari document, every other document calls it Hindi. Shaykh Bazubane Hindi Farmudand. That kind of thing you find in Persian documents. That is hidden from our children. They don't know it. They don't. So why this language started being called Urdu was because it's a contraction of the whole term Zubane Urdu hai Mualla, language of the exalted city. And the exalted city was the city of the king. And in India, the word Urdu was not used for military camp. This is Shamsur Rahman Farooqi saying this. It was always used for the king's city. That is to say, the exalted city, which was Agra and later Delhi, Shah Jahanabad. So that is a myth. Now it's a dangerous myth because in India it embarrasses Muslims. It draws them apart as people who draw their citizenship not from ordinary rights of citizenships, but were conquerors, although they were not. Another myth is that Muslims are Arabs. Muslims are not Arabs. Muslims are mostly converted people. Some of them, of course, are Arabs. Some of them are Turks. Some of them might be Persian. Some of them are Pashto-speaking people, and so on and so forth. But they were people who accepted another faith. They were Indians first. This is another part which is erased in all our textbooks. I haven't seen anyone mentioning this. The other one, Urdu is a Muslim language. Well, Urdu by its nature is not a Muslim language. It did become a language of Indian Muslims, but there's a construction. It happened. It happens to languages. Latin now is called the language of the Vatican. It wasn't always the language of the Vatican. It was the language of people who oppressed Christians and burned Christians at one time. These things change. And then Urdu is the national language and therefore a carrier of Pakistani nationalism. Well, that is because we have made it such. Otherwise, Punjabi is spoken by 44% Pakistanis. That could also be a national language. One can have more than one national language. One can question the idea of having only one national language. Those are not done in our textbooks. So our textbooks are therefore another way of keeping the garrison state alive. And that is why I question them. And I believe this is something, unless the textbooks change, we cannot ask for people with more oriented towards peace in Pakistan. Thank you.